The New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society is pleased to present this recording from April 10th, 2024. Stephanie Cowell is in conversation with Kate Quinn and Janie Chang about their experience in co-writing their novel, The Phoenix Crown, set during the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. They cover what made them decide to work together, what was it about that time period that sparked their interests, how they created a process that allowed them to work remotely on the same book, and, of course, their extensive historical research. A fascinating discussion for our writer and reader members alike. Information about our chapter and its leadership is available at our website, link listed in the description. Thank you, and enjoy the program.
Welcome, everyone, to the New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society. I'm Stephanie Cowell, historical novelist. I am speaking tonight from the Jefferson Market Library in Greenwich Village, zooming in with our guests who are presently on tour for their book, Kate Quinn and Janie Chang. And this is the book we're going to be speaking about. Do I have it? Is it in the, oh yes, okay, I see it. I see it, it's over there. Best-selling author pals Kate Quinn and Janie Chang teamed up to write The Phoenix Crown, set in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Now that they've completed a series of book tours, they're here to chat about the experience. So to tell you a little bit about each of them, Kate Quinn is a New York Times best-selling author of historical fiction, including The Alice Network and The Diamond Eye. She attended Boston University, where she earned bachelor's and master's degrees in classical voice. Now, I am a former singer, so that really impressed me. Kate and her husband now live in San Diego with 3 rescue dogs. And Janie Chang is a best-selling Canadian author of critically acclaimed historical fiction, often drawing from family history and ancestral stories for inspiration. Her works include 3 Souls, Dragon Springs Road, The Library of Legends, and The Porcelain Moon. Now, I must tell you, I read this book in the last few days. I devoured it. I found it so riveting that I hated to do anything else except lie in my bed and be totally taken away. So, giving you a very brief synopsis of the story, it's San Francisco, 1906, in the days before the earthquake. And it's brimming with newly minted millionaires and scheming upstarts and several fascinating characters. It's set in the world of opera. It's set in Chinatown. It's set in Europe. It is a fascinating, fascinating book with 4 wonderful heroines. Now, I'd like to tell you that I'm in awe of you both writing a book together. Many years ago, my husband came to me and said, let's write a book together. And after about 2 weeks, something had to go, either the marriage or the book. Needless to say, the marriage stayed, and the book is still on my hard drive. As I said, I know what to do. I'm the historical novelist, and he said, oh, I want this. And, well, anyway, but these women did it successfully. So I was so in awe of the research of this book, particularly Chinatown. And may I ask you, I know this isn't exactly in your order of questions, but you told me in the notes that Chinatown of today is nothing like the original. How did you find out what the original one was like? And is it very different than the one we found, the famous one we find today? Can either of you answer that question?
Shall I start? Because the Chinatown before 1906 burned down completely during the
Yeah.
earthquake. The
Yeah.
fire, the earthquake was destructive, but the fires that followed were even more destructive because the firemen were trying to create fire breaks and they were dynamiting sections of the town. And as a result of that, they decided to sacrifice Chinatown. So what we did was we obviously researched online because that is the easiest way to start. But we also came across photos at the San Francisco Public Library taken by people before the earthquake. And there's actually a book of photographs by a German-American photographer named Arnold Genthe, Genthe. And they are just the most charming pictures of, Chinese children walking hand in hand down the street, a flower seller selling narcissus for the Lunar New Year and so on. And the buildings themselves are nothing special. It's just, 10 or 11 blocks of standard San Francisco commercial buildings, the kind with apartments above. So there was nothing to distinguish it architecturally from being any different than the rest of commercial San Francisco. It was probably a little bit more rundown and crowded and more densely populated because the Chinese population tended to cluster there for mutual self-protection. And afterwards, the elder citizens of Chinatown decided, we've had to face so much racism. What can we do in rebuilding to try and mitigate the situation? So I think Kate can take over because she really likes this part.
It's one of the things that we really did find like a fascinating thing that didn't make it into the book because the book stops in 1911 and, we're not covering the rebuilding of Chinatown, but the way the wind was blowing was that the San Francisco councilmen were thinking of just saying, let's not rebuild Chinatown at all. Let's just get rid of all that den of iniquity. They were a lot of thundering about the dens of iniquity in Chinatown, which was very much publicized as a place which was nothing but opium dens and brothels and gambling houses. And so the Chinese elders decided, well, we need to bring in tourism for something that is more popular and less morally problematic and less problematic in the sense that, the newspapers can rile people up against us. And so to do that, they ended up hiring a white European architect and they asked him, it's like, what can you come up with something that we think that would bring people into Chinatown? And so, he made these very fanciful, drawings of, the houses with the upturned roofs and, the elaborate gates, the dragon head lampposts. And he said, well, this is what it looks like back in China, right? And they all looked at that and they're just like, no, absolutely not. It doesn't look a thing like that. But you know what? You people will love it. And so they built it. And it was really successful as a way to bring white tourists into Chinatown to, take a goggle at, the temple roofs and the exotic looking architecture, and probably also to find out the Chinese food is really fantastic. And it was so successful as a way to bring tourism, positive tourism to Chinatown, that San Francisco's Chinatown became a template for other Chinatowns around the United States and even overseas in other countries. So Janie and I did think that was really quite grimly ironic in a lot of ways, that the classic iconic look of a Chinatown in San Francisco is something that was done by a white architect who had no idea what an actual village in China would look like. And that's done with the thumbs up of the population because they knew that was what would bring the tourists in, and they were completely correct about that.
That is amazing. I mean, I really do feel I have teacher friends who have brought historical novels into their history classes and taught history that way, and it is absolutely. I never knew that. What can you tell me about what year they decided to reconstruct it? Was it after the World War I, or was it directly after the fire?
It was right after the fire and they moved as fast as they could, because there was talk about just removing the Chinese from what was formerly Chinatown, revoking land leases and, forcibly taking over property. So I think they started building like in 1908, which was two years after the 1906 earthquake. And they moved fast so that once the buildings were up, the San Francisco City Council couldn't really object to it anymore.
That's amazing. As long as we're on research, we could continue there. I was also fascinated by well, of course, the music. Kate had told me before that she trained as an opera singer, so we compared notes and wrote back about, did you find this role difficult? Did you find that role difficult? Which was really quite fascinating. But you did an awful lot of research for that, Kate, which of course I loved very much. And I was also fascinated by the research into the botanist. How in heaven's name did you do that? It's with all those long Latin names. She's such a totally Alice. She's such a marvelous character, because she never mind that the city is burning and falling down. There's this rare plant she has to save. It's these wonderful human touches that come out of your people and your research. So how on earth did you? Which one of you plunged in, or did both of you plunge in and do the research for the botany?
Well, we both really got into the botany side of things, since we both wrote Alice into both of our different sets of scenes. Our other heroines are fictionalized, but Alice Eastwood was a real woman, and she was one we knew we wanted to include right from the start. And that was because she really did have this fantastically brave moment in the San Francisco earthquake during the fires afterward. She was a amazing self-taught scientist, a single woman in her late 40s. She was head of the botany department at the California Academy of Sciences. And it became very clear that the California Academy was going to burn in the fires that were following the earthquake. And so Alice, with a very cool head and a great deal of bravery, she quite literally climbed up the 6 floors, not up the stairs of the academy to her office. The stairs had been cracked apart and were not safe. She climbed up the outside of the railing, clinging to the outsides, up 6 floors, all the way around to the 6th floor, and then at the top managed to lower down and save 1,500 rare plant samples from her personal collection. And we read that, in an account of the earthquake, and just thought, that has got to be a scene. It is too good not to put in. And so it is a scene, and we just sort of inserted our own people alongside it. And I really thought it was really quite a wonderful thing to want to include, because aren't there all kinds of scenes in books, where women risk their lives for love, or they risk their lives for their children. But I love the idea here was a woman who risked her life and limb for science, for the advancement of knowledge, for her life's work that she had spent so much time and effort collecting. And, that was really worth, celebrating. So Alice was a great character. We sort of ended up using her as a bridge between our two heroines, who are very far apart in a lot of ways, especially at the beginning of the book. And she's a bit of a mentor to our characters as well, because both of our women are younger and, on the lower rungs of their path, and they're trying really hard to establish themselves with a profession, which is really difficult for a woman in this era. And Alice is an example of an older woman who has done it. She is a botanist, she is respected in her field, and she is a shining example of the fact that women can forge a path on their own. It's hard, but it can be done. And we did actually do a research in San Francisco, and I'll let Janie tell that part.
Oh, please tell me. I must tell you that during the scene where she's going up on the outside of the stairs, that was one of the scenes that nobody who did not wish to be harmed could drag me away from your book. It was so fascinating. Janie, would you tell me more about that research?
Well, and a scene like that as all of us know as authors, you can't make it up. If we had actually cooked that up ourselves, we would have had readers saying, that's just not credible. But in this particular case, it actually happened. It was real history. So it's too good not to actually not use. So we had the most wonderful week of doing research together. One of the pure delights of doing research with a fellow historical nerd is that, unlike going to museums with husbands, you never hear the words, how long are we going to spend in this museum? We went to the California Academy of Sciences, where that was really critical, because when they found out we were fans of Alice Eastwood, the botany department, just sort of trotted out cartloads of materials that we'd written to them about beforehand. They were so thrilled that we loved Alice as much as they did. There was a photograph of Alice hanging on their wall, quite a large one, and she's wearing a hat with silk flowers on it. And, Kate and I both squealed and pointed at the hat and said, Sue Ling made the flowers on that hat, we just know it. And it was just remarkable, as you probably experienced this yourself, to be going through Alice's documents, to look at the diaries where she wrote about her trip to France one year, and where she's noting down what everything costs. It was her daily expenditures, and it's in her own handwriting, and there we are with her. And, it just sends shivers up your spine. The other great thing that happened was, through Friends of Friends, we got the behind the scenes tour of two great mansions, Filoli House and Carollands. And Carollands in particular has very limited visiting hours, but through our friend, the curator at Filoli, who actually used to work with the curator at Carollands, we ended up going there because we have a Gilded Age mansion that's featured in the novel. So we were very interested in, what those places looked like, how they were decorated, how the wealthy lived, and how the downstairs lived, how the servants came and went without being seen quite so much. So that was terrific. And of course, we went to the San Francisco Museum of Asian art and looked up beautiful examples of embroidery. But sometimes, again, serendipity, the things that you do that make you decide you need to change something in the story, it wasn't really part of research. Kate and I decided to go to a special exhibit at the Legion of Honor, and it featured Guo Pei. Kate, maybe you could just tell people a little bit about Guo Pei.
If you haven't seen her work, in fact, I can guarantee you that you have. She is a high-end Chinese couturier who specializes in the most fabulous, dense, intricate, beautiful embroidery. I mean, her work is regularly seen on red carpets. There was one year when Rihanna showed up at the Met Gala in this 15-foot canary yellow embroidered train. That was a Guo Pei. And she has single-handedly, brought back some embroidery stitches and work of the kind that has been lost for decades, like since the imperial times. And so we went to see these fabulously embroidered gowns at the museum. And when we walked in those doors, Janie's heroine Su Ling was a Chinatown seamstress, and she does a little piecework to make money on the side. And by the time we walked out of that exhibit, we were saying, she's not just a ordinary seamstress. She is a high-end embroideress who could absolutely work at a couture house in Paris if she could only get the chance. And that ended up sending the whole book on a different course from the one that we had sort of originally planned. And it gave us a way to enlarge our heroine's life in a way that was actually realistic, which just goes to show you, I think any historical novelist knows this, you'll always have your planned research, but your book will always end up getting upended in some small or large way by a piece of information you didn't even know you were looking for, but it drops in your lap and you just think, yes, okay, this is sending everything on a different path than we planned, but we're going to go with it because it's going to make it better.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. And I loved that character. And she kept expanding in depth. I mean, she really came from some rather tragic things that happened to her, and did happen to her, but she was determined and really went on and built her life, and was a wonderful friend to a lot of people. So, okay, so now getting back to your questions, what you suggested here, which is a wonderful thing. I want to know what inspired you to write the story, and why team up? How did you team up? Did you know each other? Did you call each other? How did this wonderful thing happen?
Well, in part, it happened because of the Historical Novel Society conference. Janie and
Oh,
I
really?
were both at the conference in Portland, and we both had a book come out within the last month. And so had our mutual friend, Jennifer Robson, also had a book come out. And HarperCollins Canada decided they had 3 of our authors with recent releases. They would let the 3 of us leave from the Portland conference and go on a little 3-city author tour. 3 authors, 3 events, 3 cities, pretty small. We drive ourselves around between it. It would be easy. And, really the 3 of us were just meeting. And it was when Janie and I had just really met at the conference. And the thing about that little author tour, which we wanted to christen the hysterical fiction tour rather than the historical fiction tour. And, our publicist for some reasons thought that was, unprofessional. We thought it was awesome. But we went on this tour, and everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. Luggage went missing, connecting flights were missed. If we had to drive, the car's AC broke down on the hottest day of the year. And at the end of that tour, we could have all been biting each other's heads off, and instead it was the start of a beautiful friendship. And that was really what made me think some years later, because I had the idea of writing a San Francisco earthquake book for a while. And I kept thinking, I really think this needs a Chinatown heroine. It's like that has to be front and center, Chinatown being such a central part of San Francisco's history. And so I thought, it's like, I wonder if Janie would be interested in writing it. And then I thought, well, I wonder if it's a good idea to write a book with a friend. I've written in groups before, but never with just a team as small as 2. But I thought, if we could survive the hysterical fiction tour and be friends at the end of it, the odds that we could write a book together and still be friends at the end of it are honestly pretty good. So, I called Janie up, and I crossed my fingers that she would find it as interesting as I did.
And so I said, give me 5 minutes with Wikipedia, I'll call you back. Because as you all know, in order to commit to a story and a book, you have to really feel as though there's enough material in there for you to create an interesting character, because you're going to be living with that character for months and months and months. Yeah. And the research that I did on San Francisco and Chinatown of that era was, told me that it was a very interesting time. You could definitely throw in a lot of conflict. It was the time of the Chinese Exclusion Act, so there was all sorts of stuff going on in the background that my heroine would have to contend with. So I got back to Kate and I said, sure, let's do this. But you've got, she told me she wanted an opera singer kind of a character, and I had to bring in someone who is based in Chinatown, and I'm going, a big part of the story is, how are they going to meet? How do we set it up so that they are feasibly going to meet, and that they are feasibly going to be connected in some vital, important way, that they are willing to carry on the rest of that story together?
It really did come down to that. It's like, I knew that we'd have to plot this book out together so that it was a story we were both equally invested in. And the whole idea that we really began with was, there will be, we'll each create our own heroine. I will create my heroine, and Janie would create hers, and we would create one who we were personally interested in and invested in. And then we would, I would write all the chapters from my opera singer's point of view, and Janie would write all the chapters from her Chinatown seamstress's point of view, and we could cut back and forth between the 2. But the whole idea was really that we would take 2 very different women who in the ordinary course of life would never have had a chance to meet, or much less become friends. And then we would throw these women together, and then, add an character.
How did, now I forgot what I was going to ask you. Was how, so you, Kate, largely wrote Gemma and Janie, you largely wrote Suling. Suling, do I have that right?
Yes.
And then how did the other characters come in?
Well, there isn't very much from any other character's viewpoint. We have a couple scenes from Alice's viewpoint, the botanist, and an epilogue that's sort of a little bit authorial. And those I think I wrote, but that was because Janie was in the middle of moving houses in the middle of all this and with a very tight deadline. So she was frantically unpacking boxes, and I just said, why don't I tackle this part and I'll take that off your plate and you can rewrite it if you don't like it. We'll figure that out later. And I think I ended up writing those bits, but it really isn't very much. For the most part, like 50% of the book is Gemma's point of view, which I wrote, and then 50% of the book is Su Ling's point of view, which Janie wrote. And we plotted that out in advance, very, very organized. I mean, I'm already a bit more of a plotter than a pantser, but both of us realized we'd have to be very organized to make the deadline that we had.
Oh,
And,
you
you
had
know,
a deadline. I was going to ask you that. Did you have a deadline? That was.
oh, we did, and it was a tight one, so
Oh,
we
we
had to
did.
work carefully.
I don't know why we ever agreed to it, because Kate had a book to write, and you were what, 40–60% of the way through.
Yeah,
I
I was,
had another, yeah. I
I
had
had
a book to write, and I was just starting to get into it. And then when we proposed this book to our agent, we have the same agent, and she pitched it to William Morrow. They said, "Oh, great. Do you think you could have it ready by such and such, and we'll get it out the door by such and such?" And such happened to be in between the scheduled release dates for each of our books. And for some reason, we said yes, because I think we were thinking, well, a novel is 100,000 words. You write 50, I write 50. How bad can it be?
Yeah, at some point someone's going to utter those fatal words. How hard could it be? And you think by now we would know never to hand the universe a straight line like that.
I never ask those questions when I write
Or
anymore.
smart.
It's going because it's going to be much, much harder. And if any of us knew how hard it was to do, maybe we wouldn't. But on the other hand, maybe we'd be like, I think you have to be like possessed. I think you really have to be possessed to leave your own world and the people you love and the whatever else you're doing, and just suddenly live through these people. It's a kind of wonderful madness. I really do think so. Are we? Is it time to open it up to questions? I'm sorry, I was. Susan, who is on tech today and herself a wonderful novelist, asked me to say something which I did not say, which is to not put your questions in the chat room, but to say them out loud when we came to the time. Have we come to the time?
We can, yes.
We can.
Ask people to raise their hands.
All right. Is there anything else that either one of you want to say before we open it up to questions, Kate and Janie?
No, happy to take questions.
All right, okay, great. Wow, this has been absolutely inspiring. Thank you so much. So, does anyone have any questions?
If you're not familiar with it, on the bottom, there's the sort of a thing at the bottom where you can sort of raise your hand virtually.
I'm leaving this part
You
of
have to unmute yourself.
Susan, I am a technical dunce and sort of call for one of my sons or something if something goes wrong with my computer. So whereas Susan just figures it out. And she's doing that right now.
Well, I think we're still waiting for people to ask questions, if anybody has.
Michael Ross has a question.
Okay, go ahead, Michael.
So I missed the first part of this because I got the wrong meeting ID, but basically my biggest curiosity with this was, how did you come up with the information, I guess mainly Janie, about the Chinatown and during the quake? That was pretty amazing.
Well, we went the usual route of getting all the free research we could do on the internet, but I also bought some books of photos of Chinatown both before and during and after the earthquake and the fire. And the San Francisco Public Library, where we went to do some research, had a terrific collection of pre-earthquake photos of San Francisco, some of which also included Chinatown. So that gave us an idea of the type of environment where our Chinese heroine was growing up.
And we also
Okay.
have, not only the photographs there, but since this was a huge natural disaster, we had, that meant a lot of people wrote accounts of what happened, of what happened to them during their time. And I believe there were some accounts from Chinatown members as well, because those were some very, because when there are a lot of, very vivid accounts from, people's firsthand experience of the quake, that gave us a lot of background information as well, since you had everyone, sort of started with that whole feeling, which you do before a disaster, of it seemed like an ordinary day here. I was just starting my day and then this happened. And then it gives you some of the details of ordinary life too.
But I have to tell you, there is no squealing, like the squealing of historical novelists who have just found the right maps that they needed from that time. So I found one which was, like a block by block, practically building by building map of Chinatown, which was actually created to try and show how many dens of iniquity there were, and they were all color coded. And I'm here to tell you that there were more white brothels color coded than Chinese brothels. And they marked out all the temples and, the names of the stores and the restaurants and so on. It was just the most amazing thing. So obviously, I had my heroine making her way from a laundry that actually did exist to the edges of Chinatown and heading up Nob Hill. And then I think the other one we found was an insurance company map, which was the burn map. And I think Kate probably screamed louder than I did over this one.
It literally was showing the advance of the fire, like what burned on what days and which fires were advancing from which directions and when did they join up, which was critical because, we're moving our people around the city and we wanted to make sure that they're moving in advance of the fire. And that ended up being quite useful as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, so now we have a question from Leslie. You want to ask your question?
Oops.
You're muted. Let's see.
You're still muted.
You're still, yeah.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
There I am. Hi guys. This is amazing.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi. I was just in San Francisco last week, walking through Chinatown, and I wish I had read the book to know that it was really a Disneyland. Because now I want to go back and look at everything and go, oh my God, none of this is real. Did you two find that out before you started writing or during the process? When did you discover that Chinatown was really designed by a white guy for, for the Caucasian market? I'm going to look at all of this with new eyes now.
Disneyland
we
version
found
of
out,
it.
yeah, pretty early in the reading, when you found out, how much of the city was leveled by fire, and that Chinatown was one of the areas that was absolutely decimated, then of course you're asking yourself, so what are we looking at now when we see Chinatown? And we kept on reading and came across the rebuilding of Chinatown. And it's, there's actually several articles on how there was a very deliberate, yeah, you said it, Leslie, a Disneyfication of Chinatown. And when we did go walk through, there were some buildings that replaced the original buildings. And what was really thrilling was they had also used masonry from the rubble. So you could see, for example, in some of the mission buildings, like melted brick, like melted stone that had been stuck in as part of the wall for one of the newer, for one of the replacement buildings.
Yeah.
Well, we have a question here from Martha. Martha, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Well, I would very much like to hear more about your process. Like what happened when you sent each other chapters? Did you edit each other? Did you go back and change things after reading the next person's chapter? All that kind of stuff.
Well, I think we really have one word for how this book was written, and that word is
Spreadsheets.
We plotted this whole thing out in advance. We had a couple of meetings in person where we literally holed up in a hotel room or in my living room and plotted everything. And we did it all in a spreadsheet and since we already knew that we wanted to do alternating chapters where I wrote Gemma and Janie wrote Suling, that meant therefore that like it was going back and forth, and that, you know, I had all the evens and she had all the odds, and every, you know, plotting out every chapter, we made sure that for every chapter we knew when it began and when it ended in the timeline and what was going to happen during that chapter, so that we could write in some senses a little bit independently, which was important so that we could not need to be, you know, absolutely hanging on what the other person was writing in order to keep going ourselves. Although honestly, we never really got too far away from each other, because we both are workaholics, and frankly, we both had the sensation very much of we did not want to let each other down, and we wanted to make sure that we did stick to this tight deadline. So we would write our chapters, and then we would throw them up onto a shared Google Drive for the other person to read, and that was a little nerve-wracking to start because, you know, it's like I would rather be seen in my underwear any day than have somebody see my, you know, just decanted from the brain, totally rough prose, and yet you have to show it to someone. But after a while, you know, you lose your self-consciousness about that, and it became exciting because it started to feel like, you know, I would throw my chapter up and then I couldn't wait to see what Janie was going to do with her next one. And it started to feel like we were a little bit standing on opposite sides of the fence and, you know, throwing pieces of the story back and forth.
And, you know, the thing is, every row on the spreadsheet held a description, like an overview of what had to happen in that chapter. So I knew where Kate's chapter was going to begin, and I knew how the action would end, and vice versa. So that allowed us to dovetail our chapters in terms of the storyline. But, you know, inside an overview, there's a lot of freedom to, you know, put in your own ideas and thoughts and feelings, and that was the exciting thing. And after a while, it really was like I was writing as fast as I could so that I could throw my chapter into the Google Drive, and, you know, and then that just meant that I would see Kate's chapter sooner. And it got to be really exciting. It was nerve-wracking, but it was also really exciting.
And it was also something that I think, and if anybody was thinking about, you know, collaborating with someone, we approached this with a great deal of mutual respect right from the start. I mean, this was very much our book, which meant that, you know, any major plot considerations we hashed out together, you know, so that every decision was mutual and not, you know, one-sided. But it was, even though it was our book, I was very aware that, you know, Janie's chapters were hers, so that when I was editing or reading her chapters, I did not start, you know, red penning my way through, because those are her words. You know, I would put suggestions aside saying, hey, I think we can cut this bit here and move that to another chapter later, or can we condense this opening bit? It's feeling a little slow pace-wise, but I'm not going to start making those fixes myself on her pages. And we started that really from the beginning because we wanted very much to make sure that, you know, we had a book by the end that we were proud of, but that we also were still on speaking terms by the end of it. And so therefore we made sure that we, you know, were approaching each other's words with, you know, not only respect, but the idea that anything that we were finding problematic that we could tackle together. And so I see a question in the chat from Alan about what was the most difficult part of working together, any major disagreement. We really did not have any major disagreements, because every time there was a problem with the book, the solution was, okay, let's hop on Zoom or let's hop on the phone and we will hash this out. And the nice thing about working with someone else is that two heads really are better than one. Like when we had a problem, we could tackle it together and find a solution usually, and much more quickly than you do when you're trying to find a solution to your own book problem and you're just staring at a wall. And but we found our solutions faster, and we found generally something that was better than something that we could have come up with individually. So really, that part of the book was a real pleasure. And I think it did help that, we both are very much the kind of people who, if you've worked on a group project, everybody knows the sensation of there's, you're you start to feel like the person who's carrying most of the work, and then there's one person who's always coasting. Janie and I both very much felt like we were the kind of people who would rather die than coast on a group project. So we never had the sensation that one of us was not taking it as seriously as the other. And I think that helps a lot too, if you're thinking about co-authoring.
Yeah, especially since, one of the main reasons that we wanted to write a book together, apart from wanting to write a good book together, was that we wanted to go on book tour together, and that wasn't going to work out really well if we were no longer on speaking terms, right? And I would also say that it's not as though Suling had her own chapters and Gemma had her own chapters. At some point in the story, they meet. So you have chapters where Gemma is sort of the narrator, but Suling is in the scene, and vice versa. And in those cases, I might say to Kate, you know what, I think that if Suling would react a lot more strongly to this particular word or to this particular incident, can you dial up the indignation or whatever. Or Kate might write something in one of my chapters and say, in one of her chapters and say, this is what I would like Suling to say, but would you like to use her own words? And it would always go on the side in comment bubbles. And we were always very, very respectful of each other's ideas in writing, because honestly, we're great fans of each other's work anyway. But doing that respectfully, always discussing things right down to there might be a plot change, in which case both of us would have to go back and tweak earlier chapters,
It is a lot of discussion back and forth, but Zoom really has made a lot of great things possible there. I think we only met in person about 4 or 5 times.
Really?
We were lucky that I've spent a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest, close to where Janie is in Vancouver, so we were only a few hours apart for the majority of the writing of this book. So we met once or twice just to hash out the plot idea enough to get a proposal for our agent. And then we met once or twice to hash out to get that spreadsheet up and to get the plot and the outline of it as clear as possible so we could begin drafting. And then we met up again right at the point when we were at the climax of the book, because we were on a mutual vacation, and there was we took some extra days to hole up in a cabin and do some work there. And then we did our major edits together. Like when our editor came back with our major edits, we pretty much, Janie drove south for 2 hours, I drove north for 2 hours. We got a hotel room in Vancouver, and we pretty much holed up for about 3 days and did nothing but work. And we, in that case, just passed the chapters back and forth and just had it open there and discussed every single thing as we went. We did all the major fixes that way, and we hashed the whole thing out, honestly, in about 3 days. So I don't even want to tell you how many cups of coffee and mounds of snacks there were, because we're basically not leaving the room. But
how amazing. Can I ask you how long this process took from the beginning of the writing to you sending it into your editor? How long did it take? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
I think it's like 8 or 9 months.
8 or 9 months. You're talking.
It was a tight deadline.
Very tight deadline. And we only had to write 50,000 words each. How bad could it be?
How hard could it be?
Okay, we'll look at the gallery one more time and see if there's another question before we start to wind up a little bit. Is there one more question? Oh, here we go. Michael, you have a question? Go ahead.
So how did you decide on Thornton as the villain, and how much of what you had with Thornton was historical and how much made up?
Thornton was a robber baron. What was overwhelmingly coming through in our research was that San Francisco had been a boom town, and it was money made from mining and the railways and, shipping. And there were a lot of pretty bad characters who made their fortune there. But now San Francisco is, at this time of its life, wanting to show off its wealth and, pretensions to culture. And Thornton is one of these guys who wants to prove that he's not just all about the money. He wants to be a patron of the arts. And so he was really not so much based on a single person, but sort of this vision that we had of someone who represented the transition from rough and tumble San Francisco to, they wanted to be the New York City of the West.
And it's also a thing where we needed a link between our two heroines, because my heroine, Gemma, is a New York City opera singer who has just newly arrived in town. She's the newest member of the Metropolitan Opera Company chorus. The Met is destined to open with a production of Carmen the night before the earthquake happens, fatefully. And Su Ling is a longtime resident of San Francisco, born and raised in Chinatown. These women would have no reason to cross paths. So we needed to find ways for them to plausibly be drawn into the same orbit. And we thought that a patron is a great way to do that. And that was easy to do because Thornton being a man, we got the name H. Thornton from a document for a silver mine, actually, that we found during the research. It was just a name on us as the owner of a silver mine in the area. And I believe a great deal of land around it. We thought, perfect, we'll just use that. And we thought we will make him a patron of the arts. And there are two ways in which he can get involved in both of our heroines' lives. If he's a patron of the arts, he's an opera fan, so therefore he offers to be a patron to Gemma and make her a star, which is something that is very, very common for opera singers of that day, is that you would have a wealthy patron who would, promote your name, who would give you recitals, who would support your career, who would promote you to opera companies in lead roles and so forth. The question, of course, would be how many strings and what kind of strings does that patronage come with, which is one of the questions that Gemma has in the book. The other way in which Thornton can be a patron to Su Ling is that he is a collector of chinoiserie, which was very popular at the time. There's so much looted treasure coming from China to Europe, and which is creating this craze for, Chinese screens, Chinese porcelain, Chinese urns, Chinese tapestries, and the wealthy are collecting these things. And it's really the flip side of that. There's on the one hand, the fear mongering and the hatred that is in the newspapers, where the Chinese citizens are stripped of their rights and they are depicted as being nothing other than, purveyors of, sex and opium and, dens of gambling and so forth. But on the other hand, there's this fetishization and the Orientalism that is so popular. And Thornton has a huge collection of Chinese antiquities. And one of those is a dragon robe of a type that has been damaged, and he hires Su Ling to make the repairs to that. And so this was the way in which we could plausibly bring two women with so little in common into the same orbit, so that they start to realize that, become aware of each other's existence. And that allowed us to delve more into, the world of not only Chinese antiquities, the Phoenix Crown being the jewel of his collection, but also the world of opera as well, and how they can both be pulled together by the same man. I think we have one more question from Julie.
Julie?
There we go. Sorry. Hi. Thank you for doing this. This is a really interesting talk, and I'm really curious to read your book now. So I'm going to throw sort of a little widget into this. Has anybody watched the series Warrior on Netflix? Because it's about the Tong Wars in San Francisco, and it takes place literally right before the Civil War. So it's like 1862, 63, something like that. And it's based on a treatment that Bruce Lee did like 50 years ago. Of course, Hollywood wouldn't put him in it because, Asian men weren't allowed to be lead actors until about 4 or 5 years ago. So his daughter Shannon resurrected it, got some writers together, fleshed out the treatment, said, hey, Netflix, will you give us money to do this? And they did. Has anybody seen it?
I have not, but I want to put that on my list now.
Okay, here's like a warning. It is really violent. I mean, really, like, I don't mind violence, and there's some scenes where I flinched. So it's graphic violence with amazing fight choreography. And the lead actor is actually Japanese British. And he does sort of an American accent. So it's a pan-Asian cast, even though everyone is supposed to be Chinese. Graphically violent, some really graphic sex, lots of drug use, lots of swearing. However, it's really good historical fiction. And it's this period that, unless you're kind of a geek about that time period, a lot of people don't know that history of the Tong Wars that lasted well into the 20th century. And probably some residual stuff still floats around San Francisco. I'm guessing there's still some like little gang or family kind of stuff that goes on. Obviously not, full on killing each other in the streets kind of thing. But it's quite timely too, because the big war between the Chinese and the white people is there's Irish dock workers who are being put out of work because the Chinese will work cheaper. So there's that thing. Then there's the wars between the three Tongs, and it's really interesting. And the acting's amazing. It looks gorgeous, blah, blah, blah. But it's super violent.
May
Um,
I interrupt this fascinating thing? I'll look it up by saying that we have to wind up now, unfortunately. So I leave you with sight of this totally gripping book. Don't plan anything pressing you have to do when you're reading it, because you won't get it done. And I wanted to thank Kate and Janie so much for coming online to speak to the New York Historical Society.
That concludes our program. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. You can find out more about the New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society and our leadership at our website, or contact us at hns-nyc@mail.com. And finally, please consider supporting our volunteer panelists and hosts. You can contact them at their websites in the description. Thanks for joining us.